Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. Your support helps us bring you more stories like this. Now, let us begin. Elizabeth Camp was 33 years old at the time of her death and lived and worked in South London. She was employed as a housekeeper and barmaid at the Good Intent public house on East Street in Woolwich, a position she had held on and off for several years. Those who knew her described her as diligent, respectable, and reliable, qualities that were later confirmed through formal testimony. Her working life had been steady, and before returning to the Good Intent, she had been employed elsewhere, including work as a nurse in Winchmore Hill. Elizabeth's personal circumstances suggested stability and optimism. She was engaged to be married to Edward Bry, a greengrocer whose shop stood directly opposite the public house where she worked. Their wedding was planned for the near future and was only weeks away. According to those around her, Elizabeth had already begun preparing for the marriage and appeared to be looking ahead to the next stage of her life. There was no indication that she was troubled or unhappy. She remained close to her family, particularly her married sisters, with whom she kept regular contact. These relationships formed an important part of her daily life and would shape her plans on the day she died. At the time of her death, Elizabeth Camp was regarded as a woman of good character, with no known enemies, no financial difficulties, and no personal conflicts. This portrait of her life and reputation provides the necessary context for understanding the circumstances that followed and the shock caused by her sudden and violent death. On the morning of Thursday, the 11th of February, 1897, Elizabeth Camp had the day free from her duties at the Good Intent public house. She left the premises in good spirits, dressed neatly and prepared for a full day visiting family. She carried with her a green purse and a silver-tipped umbrella, appropriate for the cold February weather. Witnesses later noted that she appeared cheerful and seemed to enjoy the brief break from her usual routine. Her first destination was Hammersmith, where she spent time with her sister Annie. During this visit, the sisters talked over ordinary family matters, and Elizabeth spoke openly about her upcoming wedding. She gave no sign of anxiety or distress, and nothing in her manner suggested that she was worried or preoccupied. After leaving Annie, Elizabeth continued on to visit another sister, Frances Haynes, who was preparing to move to Woolwich. At Frances's home, Elizabeth stayed for some time and helped sort and pack belongings. The two women worked together calmly, and again there was no indication that Elizabeth was troubled. During their conversation, the subject of money arose. Elizabeth opened her purse and handed her sister 38 shillings, explaining that she had only 3 shillings left and had not brought much with her. She also mentioned that she had left her gold watch at home. Once the packing was finished, the sisters walked together to the station. This was the last time Elizabeth Camp was seen alive by her family. At the station, Elizabeth Camp purchased a second-class ticket for the 7:42 evening train bound for Waterloo. Her sister, Frances Haynes, noticed the choice and asked why she did not travel third class instead. Elizabeth replied that there were fewer and nicer people in second-class compartments. Frances expressed mild concern, suggesting that third class might be safer for women traveling alone, as there were usually more passengers present. Elizabeth dismissed the concern and did not appear worried by the idea of traveling alone. Elizabeth then boarded the train and entered a second-class compartment. At the time she stepped inside, the compartment was empty. This detail later became significant in the reconstruction of events, but at the moment, it attracted no attention. The train departed on schedule and made its way toward central London. Meanwhile, at Waterloo Station, Edward Bry waited among the busy evening crowds for Elizabeth's arrival. The station was active, with passengers disembarking, staff moving through the concourse, and others preparing to leave on outgoing trains. Edward watched the arriving Hounslow service pull in shortly before 8 o'clock. As passengers stepped down from the carriages, he scanned the crowd, expecting to see Elizabeth emerge. Minutes passed, and she did not appear. Edward assumed that she must have stayed longer with her sister and missed the train. There was no immediate cause for alarm. The train's arrival at Waterloo marked the final confirmed point at which Elizabeth Camp was known to be alive. Her disappearance went unnoticed amid the movement of the station. After the train arrived at Waterloo Station, routine cleaning procedures began. Railway cleaners boarded the carriages to collect rubbish and prepare the train for its return journey. One young cleaner entered a second-class compartment near the rear of the train. The door was closed, and when he opened it, he expected to find an empty space or discarded newspapers. Instead, he saw a woman lying motionless on the floor of the compartment. At first, the cleaner thought she might be asleep or unwell. However, upon closer inspection, he noticed her unnatural position, the stillness of her body, and blood on her clothing. Realizing that she was dead, he attempted to move her. With difficulty, he dragged her into the narrow passageway between the compartments. As her cape loosened, the extent of her injuries became clear. Her face had been badly battered, and blood stained both her clothes and the interior of the carriage. The seat cushions and wooden paneling inside the compartment were marked with blood. Shocked by what he had uncovered, the cleaner cried out that a murder had taken place. His shout echoed along the platform. It was approximately 8:35 in the evening. Railway staff and station police quickly arrived at the scene. By that time, all passengers from the train had already left the platform. If the person responsible had traveled to Waterloo, they had disappeared into the crowd. No weapon was found inside the compartment. The violence of the attack was immediately apparent to those who first examined the scene. At the far end of the platform, Edward Bry noticed unusual activity among railway officials and police officers. He saw a stretcher being brought forward and watched as something covered with sheets was lifted onto it and carried away. The presence of police and railway workers increased his concern. Elizabeth had not arrived as expected, and the sight of the stretcher caused him to fear the worst. Edward attempted to move closer to the scene but was stopped by a guard and told to remain back. As he stood nearby, he overheard fragments of conversation. People were saying that a woman had been found dead in one of the carriages, and that it was no ordinary death. It was murder. Without waiting for confirmation, Edward hurried from the station and hired a cab to take him across the river to St. Thomas's Hospital. He still hoped that the victim might not be Elizabeth. At the hospital, a nurse escorted him inside. He was taken to view the body. When the covering was removed, he immediately recognized Elizabeth Camp, despite her injuries. The shock quickly gave way to grief. A doctor allowed him a moment before gently leading him away. A post-mortem examination was ordered. It confirmed that Elizabeth had been murdered. Her skull had been crushed by repeated blows from a blunt instrument delivered with great force and speed. Death was likely instantaneous. There were no signs of any other form of assault. Her purse and ticket were missing, though other valuables remained. Bone cufflinks not belonging to her were found in the carriage. Following the discovery of Elizabeth Camp's body, detectives from Scotland Yard joined the investigation alongside Superintendent Robinson of the London and South Western Railway Police. Their early efforts focused on reconstructing Elizabeth's final journey and establishing how the crime had taken place. Medical experts were consulted to analyze the nature of her injuries and the position of her body. Based on their findings, investigators concluded that Elizabeth had likely been attacked while seated in the compartment. The blows appeared to have been delivered from her left side, and the speed and force of the attack suggested she had little or no time to cry out. The lack of defensive wounds supported the idea that the assault was sudden and unexpected. Police believed that after the attack, the killer had dragged Elizabeth's body beneath the seats. This action was interpreted as an attempt to conceal the crime and avoid detection when the train stopped at stations. The combination of extreme violence and deliberate concealment suggested someone who acted quickly and then tried to cover what they had done. At first light the following morning, police and railway officials conducted a careful search along the railway line the train had traveled. A few hundred yards beyond the Putney side of Wandsworth Station, they made a significant discovery. Lying near the track was a heavy, blunt object stained with blood. It was an ironstone china club, weighing over 3 pounds, and marked with a number. Its location and condition led police to believe it was the murder weapon. An inquest was opened to examine the circumstances surrounding Elizabeth Camp's death. Medical testimony was given by Dr. Bond, who described the injuries in detail. He stated that Elizabeth had suffered at least 4 distinct blows to the head, each delivered with considerable force. The wounds indicated that the attack had been sudden and that death would have followed quickly. Dr. Bond also explained that she likely did not cry out or attempt to defend herself. Railway guard Edwin Collins was called as a witness. He testified that he had been working on the train that evening and was occupied with mailbags at both Wandsworth and Waterloo stations. Because of his duties, he did not observe passengers leaving the train in any unusual manner. Collins confirmed that no one could have jumped from the train before it reached Waterloo. He also described how a cleaner alerted him to the presence of a dead woman in one of the carriages. Alfred Harris, the landlord of the Good Intent public house, also gave evidence. He explained that he had known Elizabeth since 1885 and described her as a hard worker with a good reputation. He spoke about her employment history and confirmed her engagement to Edward Bry. Harris stated that Elizabeth was not known to keep questionable company. At the conclusion of the inquest, the jury returned a verdict of willful murder by person or persons unknown. News of Elizabeth Camp's murder spread quickly across London and caused widespread unease. The fact that such a violent crime had occurred on a moving train alarmed the public, particularly women who relied on rail travel. In the absence of clear answers, rumors began to circulate rapidly. Reports emerged from various parts of the city, including Vauxhall and Clapham Junction, describing men behaving strangely on the night of the murder. One story described a man in a dark coat who entered a public house in Vauxhall, appeared agitated, and demanded brandy. Another rumor placed a man at Clapham Junction who was seen leaving a train with his hand wrapped in a cloth. Police investigated these claims, but found no evidence connecting them to the crime. A more detailed account came from Wandsworth, where witnesses described a well-dressed man leaping from the train in a frantic manner. He was seen rushing down the station stairs and entering a nearby public house called the Alma. Inside, he ordered drinks quickly and was observed throwing money around. Patrons later noticed stains on his shirt, which he claimed were furniture polish. Police traced the man through the cab he hired after leaving the pub. When questioned, he provided an explanation that officers found satisfactory, and he was released. Another suspect, Thomas Stone, who knew the Camp family, was also questioned and released after accounting for his movements. None of these early leads resulted in charges. As the investigation continued, Elizabeth Camp was laid to rest at Norwood Cemetery under a gray London sky. Her family mourned while police pursued additional leads. Newspapers followed the case closely, publishing dramatic headlines and detailed accounts of every rumored suspect. This coverage intensified public anxiety and encouraged speculation, even when evidence was weak or non-existent. Several individuals were detained based on hearsay or idle remarks. One innocent man in Hounslow was arrested after a casual comment made by a woman. He was held for hours while police investigated, then released when it became clear he had no connection to the crime. These incidents highlighted the pressure authorities faced and the lack of solid evidence. One of the more prominent suspects was Arthur Marshall, a young man arrested in Reading. He was thought to resemble a man seen in a public house and was known to have purchased a false mustache on the day of the murder. Police questioned him extensively and initially considered him a credible suspect. However, witness descriptions did not align consistently. Some said the man they saw had sideburns, while Marshall did not. Others believed the suspect was older. During his detention, Marshall became increasingly distressed and eventually broke down. With no clear link to the weapon or the crime and no reliable identification, he was released. Each promising lead failed under scrutiny, and the investigation repeatedly returned to uncertainty and frustration. As time passed and no arrest was made, the investigation into Elizabeth Camp's murder gradually slowed. Nearly 2 years later, in November 1898, Sir Edward Bradford, Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, publicly criticized the handling of the case. He stated that there had been a significant delay in notifying Scotland Yard of the murder, and that valuable time had been lost. According to Bradford, this delay reduced the chance of apprehending the killer near the station or surrounding roads. St. Thomas's Hospital defended its actions, explaining that an officer had been summoned promptly. However, Others agreed with Bradford's assessment. Sir Robert Anderson, head of the Criminal Investigation Department, also commented on the case. He used it as an example of the shortcomings of English policing at the time. Anderson noted that in France, the railway carriage would have been sealed immediately and preserved as a crime scene until investigators arrived. In this case, too much potential evidence had been disturbed too quickly. Despite ongoing efforts, no suspect was ever conclusively identified. Witness accounts conflicted, reported sightings led nowhere, and physical evidence failed to point to a single individual. Public interest eventually faded, and police resources were redirected elsewhere. The person who murdered Elizabeth Camp on the train to Waterloo was never found. Her death remains one of the most unsettling crimes of the Victorian railway era. A murder committed in public, yet never explained, leaving behind questions that were never answered.